That his views and measures were always the wisest needs not to be affirmed, nor should it be on this occasion, where so many, thinking differently, join in doing honor to his memory. A free people, in times of peace and quiet, when pressed by no common danger, naturally divide into parties. At such times, the man who is of neither party is not, cannot be of any consequence. Mr. Clay, therefore, was of a party, taking a prominent part as he did in all the great political questions of his country for the last half-century. The wisdom of his course on many is doubted and denied by a large portion of his countrymen, and of such it is not now proper to speak particularly. But there are many others about his course upon which there is little or no disagreement amongst intellect and patriotic Americans. Of these last are the War of 1812, the Missouri question, nullification, and the now recent compromise measures. In 1812, Mr. Clay, though not unknown, was still a young man. Whether we should go to war with Great Britain being the question of the day, a minority opposed the declaration of war by Congress, while the majority, though apparently inclining to war, had for years wavered and hesitated to act decisively. Meanwhile, British aggressions multiplied and grew more daring and aggravated. By Mr. Clay, more than any other man, the struggle was brought to a decision in Congress. The question, being now fully before Congress, came up, in a variety of ways in rapid succession, on most of which occasions Mr. Clay spoke, adding to all the logic of which the subject was susceptible. That noble inspiration, which came to him as it came to no other, he aroused and nerved and inspired his friends, and confounded and bore down all opposition. Several of his speeches on these occasions were reported, and are still extant, but the best of these all never was. During its delivery the reporters forgot their vocations, dropped their pens, and sat enchanted from near the beginning to quite the close. The speech now lives only in the memory of a few old men, and the enthusiasm with which they cherish their recollection of it is absolutely astounding. The precise language of this speech we shall never know, but we do know, we cannot help knowing, that with deep pathos it pleaded the cause of the injured sailor, that it invoked the genius of the Revolution, that it apostrophized the names of Otis, of Henry, and of Washington, that it appealed to the interest, the pride, the honor, and the glory of the nation, that it shamed and taunted the timidity of friends, that it scorned and scouted and withered the temerity of domestic foes, that it bearded and defied the British lion, and rising, and swelling, and maddening in its course, it sounded the onset till the charge, the shock, the steady struggle of the glorious victory. All passed in vivid review before the entranced hearers. Important and exciting as was the war question of 1812, it never so alarmed the sagacious statesmen of the country, for the safety of the Republic, as afterwards did the Missouri question. This sprang from that unfortunate source of discord, Negro slavery. When our federal constitution was adopted, we owned no territory beyond the limits or ownership of the states, except the territory northwest of the River Ohio and east of the Mississippi. What has since been formed into the states of Maine, Kentucky, and Tennessee was, I believe, within the limits of or owned by Massachusetts, Virginia, and North Carolina. As to the Northwestern Territory, provision had been made, even before the adoption of the Constitution, that slavery should never go there. On the admission of the states into the Union carved from the territory we owned before the Constitution, no question, or at most, no considerable question, arose about slavery. Those which were within the limits of or owned by the old states, following, respectively, the condition of the parent state, and those within the Northwest Territory, following the previously made provision, on the admission of the states into the Union carved from the territory we owned before the Constitution, no question, or at most no considerable question, arose about slavery. Those which were within the limits of or owned by the old states, following respectively the condition of the parent state, and those within the Northwest Territory, following the previously made provision. But in 1803, we purchased Louisiana from the French, and it included, with much more, what has since been formed into the state of Missouri. With regard to it, nothing had been done to forestall the question of slavery. When, therefore, in 1819, Missouri, having formed a state constitution without excluding slavery, and with slavery already actually existing within its limits, knocked at the door of the Union for admission, almost the entire representation of the non-slave-holding states objected. A fearful and angry struggle instantly followed. This alarmed thinking men more than any previous question because, unlike all the former, it divided the country by geographical lines. Other questions had their opposing partisans in all localities of the country and in almost every family, so that no division of the Union could follow such, without a separation of friends, to quite as great an extent as that of opponents. Not so with the Missouri question. On this a geographical line could be traced which, in the main, would separate opponents only. This was the danger. Mr. Jefferson, then in retirement, wrote, "I had for a long time ceased to read newspapers, or to pay any attention to public affairs, confident they were in good hands, and content to be a passenger in our bark to the shore from which I am not distant. But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line, coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. I can say, with conscious truth, that there is not a man on earth who would sacrifice more than I would to relieve us from this heavy reproach in any practicable way. The cession of that kind of property, for so it is misnamed, is a bagatelle, which would not cost me a second thought, if, in that way, a general emancipation and expatriation could be effected, and gradually, and with due sacrifices I think it might be. But as it is, we have the wolf by the ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in the other." Mr. Clay was in Congress, and, perceiving the danger, at once engaged his whole energies to avert it. It began, as I have said, in 1819, and it did not terminate till 1821. Missouri would not yield the point, and Congress, that is, a majority of Congress, by repeated votes, showed a determination to not admit the state unless it should yield. After several failures, and great labor on the part of Mr. Clay, to so present the question that a majority could consent to the admission, it was, by a vote, rejected, and as all seemed to think, finally, a sullen gloom hung over the nation. All felt that the rejection of Missouri was equivalent to a dissolution of the Union, because those states which already had what Missouri was rejected for refusing to relinquish would go with Missouri. All deprecated and deplored this, but none saw how to avert it. For the judgment of members to be convinced of the necessity of yielding was not the whole difficulty. Each had a constituency to meet and to answer to. Mr. Clay, though worn down and exhausted, was appealed to by members to renew his efforts at compromise. He did so, and by some judicious modifications of his plan, coupled with laborious efforts with individual members, and his own overmastering eloquence upon the floor, he finally secured the admission of the state. Brightly and captivating as it had previously shown, it was now perceived that his great eloquence was a mere embellishment, or, at most, but a helping hand to his inventive genius, and his devotion to his country in the day of her extreme peril. After the settlement of the Missouri question, although a portion of the American people have differed with Mr. Clay, a majority even appear generally to have been opposed to him on questions of ordinary administration. He seems constantly to have been regarded by all as the man for a crisis. Accordingly, in the days of nullification, and more recently in the reappearance of the slavery question, connected with our territory newly acquired of Mexico, the task of devising a mode of adjustment seems to have been cast upon Mr. Clay by common consent, and his performance of the task in each case was little else than a literal fulfillment of the public expectation. Mr. Clay's efforts in behalf of the South Americans, and afterwards in behalf of the Greeks, in the times of their respective struggles for civil liberty, are among the finest on record, among the noblest of all themes, and bear ample corroboration of what I have said was his ruling passion, a love of liberty and right, unselfishly, and for their own sakes. Having been led to allude to domestic slavery so frequently already, I am unwilling to close without referring more particularly to Mr. Clay's views and conduct in regard to it. He ever was, on principle and in feeling, opposed to slavery. The very earliest and one of the latest public efforts of his life, separated by a period of more than 50 years, were both made in favor of gradual emancipation of the slaves in Kentucky. He did not perceive that on a question of human right, the Negroes were to be accepted from the human race. And yet, Mr. Clay was the owner of slaves. Cast into life where slavery was already widely spread and deeply seated, he did not perceive, as I think no wise man has perceived, how it could be at once eradicated without producing a greater evil, even to the cause of human liberty itself. His feeling and his judgment, therefore, ever led him to oppose both extremes of opinion on the subject. Those who would shiver into fragments the union of these states, tear to tatters its now venerated constitution, and even burn the last copy of the Bible rather than slavery should continue a single hour, together with all their more halting sympathizers, have received and are receiving their just execration. And the name and opinions and influence of Mr. Clay are fully, and as I trust, effectually and enduringly arrayed against them. But I would also, if I could, array his name, opinions, and influence against the opposite extreme, against a few but an increasing number of men who, for the sake of perpetuating slavery, are beginning to assail and to ridicule the white man's charter of freedom, the declaration that all men are created free and equal. So far as I have learned, the first American of any note to do or attempt this was the late John C. Calhoun, and if I mistake not, it soon after found its way into some of the messages of the governors of South Carolina. We, however, look for, and are not much shocked by, political eccentricities and heresies in South Carolina. But, only last year, I saw with astonishment what purported to be a letter of a very distinguished and influential clergyman of Virginia, copied with apparent approbation into a St. Louis newspaper, containing the following, to me, very extraordinary language. I am fully aware that there is a text in some Bibles that is not in mine. Professional abolitionists have made more use of it than of any passage in the Bible. It came, however, as I trace it, from St. Voltaire, and was baptized by Thomas Jefferson, and since almost universally regarded as canonical authority. All men are born free and equal. This is a genuine coin in the political currency of our generation. I am sorry to say that I have never seen two men of whom it is true, but I must admit I never saw the Siamese twins, and therefore will not dogmatically say that no man ever saw a proof of this sage aphorism. This sounds strangely in Republican America. The like was not heard in the fresher days of the Republic. Let us contrast with it the language of that truly national man, whose life and death we now commemorate and lament. I quote from a speech of Mr. Clay delivered before the American Colonization Society in 1827. We are reproached with doing mischief by the agitation of this question. The society goes into no household to disturb its domestic tranquility. It addresses itself to no slaves to weaken their obligations of obedience. It seeks to affect no man's property. It neither has the power nor the will to affect the property of anyone contrary to his consent. The execution of its scheme would augment, instead of diminishing, the value of the property left behind. The society, composed of free men, concerns itself only with the free. Collateral consequences we are not responsible for. It is not this society which has produced the great moral revolution which the age exhibits. What would they, who thus reproach us, have done? If they would repress all tendencies towards liberty and ultimate emancipation, they must do more than put down the benevolent efforts of this society. They must go back to the era of our liberty and independence, and muzzle the cannon which thunders its annual joyous return. They must renew the slave trade with all its train of atrocities. They must suppress the workings of British philanthropy, seeking to ameliorate the condition of the unfortunate West Indian slave. They must arrest the career of South American deliverance from thraldom. They must blow out the moral lights around us and extinguish that greatest torch of all which America presents to a benighted world, pointing the way to their rights, their liberties, and their happiness. And when they have achieved all those purposes, their work will be yet incomplete.